The Sahara Desert hides entire cities beneath its sand. This is the mystery of the shifting sands and the ancient metropolises they swallowed. You will learn how to see the world's largest desert not as an empty wasteland, but as a lost chapter in human history. We will uncover how a green paradise turned to dust, taking sophisticated societies with it, and what their rediscovery tells us about our own future. How do you think a civilization survives when its world literally turns to sand? That golden, lifeless expanse is a recent invention in Earth's long story. Just 10,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert at all. It was a sprawling, vibrant green paradise. This was the African Humid Period, a remarkable chapter lasting for millennia, where shifts in our planet's tilt and orbit brought monsoon rains far north of their current reach. What is now an ocean of sand was once a mosaic of shimmering lakes, winding river systems, and vast grasslands. Hippos wallowed in waterways that have long since vanished. Giraffes and elephants moved through savannas where today you would find only the barest hints of life. It was a land of profound bounty. And where there is water and life, people follow. This climatic gift created the perfect conditions for human communities to not just survive, but to truly flourish. They settled along these ancient shores, hunted the abundant game, and began to build something lasting. The stage was set not for mere survival, but for the rise of sophisticated cultures. The Green Sahara is the essential first act, the fertile ground from which our mystery grows. It forces us to see the desert not as a permanent barrier, but as a dynamic, changing entity, a landscape with a memory. This dramatic transformation from a world of water to a world of wind and dust is the core paradox. It makes the loss that followed so much more profound. If such a thriving ecosystem could vanish, what happened to the people who called it home? Their story is written not in libraries, but in the very sand that now covers them. These ancient artists left us the first pages of their story on the very walls of their world. Scattered across the desolate plateaus of the Sahara, like the Tassili Ennager in Algeria, are galleries of rock art so vivid they defy the barren landscape that now surrounds them. The images are breathtaking in their clarity and contrast. You see figures swimming with joyful strokes in deep blue water. You see hunters with bows drawn taking aim at giraffes and elephants. Most telling of all, you see vast herds of plump, healthy cattle being tended by herders in scenes of pastoral tranquility. This is not the art of a desert people. It is the art of a people living in a land of lakes and grasslands, a direct and undeniable snapshot of daily life in the Green Sahara. These paintings are far more than decoration. They are historical documents, a conscious record of a world they knew and cherished. They tell us these communities were not just surviving, they were observing, celebrating, and documenting their place within a thriving ecosystem. But art alone could be dismissed as fantasy, a collective dream of a better place. The true power of this clue comes when it is paired with hard, physical evidence from the earth itself. Modern archaeology does not rely on one thread of proof. Satellite technology, peering down from orbit, has revealed the ghostly imprints of that lost world etched into the desert floor. Scientists can now map vast, fossilized river channels, wide ribbons that once carried monsoon rains from distant highlands. They can trace the outlines of enormous paleo lakes, some larger than entire countries, their ancient shorelines still visible from space. Geologists studying these features confirm this was a landscape shaped by abundant, persistent water. The intricate network of waterways and basins they've mapped provides the perfect physical stage for the scenes painted on the cave walls. The herds needed those rivers to drink from. The swimmers needed those lakes to plunge into. This is the convergence that turns mystery into fact. The artistic record and the geological record are two halves of the same story, singing in harmony across thousands of years. This powerful combination transforms those silent figures on the rock from anonymous artists into our guides. They are showing us their home, their sophisticated observation, their clear cultural identity forces a profound question. If they were capable of such organized, communal expression and of managing large herds of animals, what else were they capable of building? Rock shelters and temporary camps are one thing, but thriving, settled societies often leave behind much more. The art proves they were here, and the land proves it could support them. So where did they live? The paintings show us the backdrop of their lives, the water and the wildlife. But the stage itself, the towns, the gathering places, the centers of their community, those remained hidden. The artists showed us their world, but they did not show us their cities. That revelation would require a different kind of search, one that looked not at the surface of the rock, but beneath the surface of the sand. The art shows a world of plenty, but the climate had other plans. As the rains began to fail around 5,000 years ago, a creeping dryness took hold of the Sahara. The Great Lakes shrank, the rivers faded to dust, and the green paradise slowly retreated. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, relentless squeeze that unfolded over centuries. For the communities who had flourished there, life became a series of difficult choices. They could follow the retreating water south, abandoning the homes they knew, or they could adapt to the new, harsher reality right where they were. Many chose to stay, and in doing so, they began to engineer a new kind of civilization from the bones of the old one. Their greatest challenge was also their most precious resource, water. In a landscape where it was vanishing, controlling the last remaining sources meant survival. Scattered across the desert were oases, islands of green fed by ancient underground aquifers. These became the new anchors of life. What began as simple watering holes for herders and their animals gradually transformed into something far more significant. They became natural crossroads. A trader carrying exotic stones from a distant mountain range would stop to drink. A herder moving cattle between scant patches of grass would rest in the shade. These chance meetings at the oasis edge slowly crystallized into organized exchange. You can picture the scene, a bustling patch of palm trees surrounded by endless sand, becoming a temporary marketplace. Goods began to flow along invisible pathways connecting one oasis to the next, creating the earliest strands of a trade network. This was the humble, practical origin of the legendary trans-Saharan routes that would later carry gold and salt across the continent. Its birth was not in grandeur but in necessity. Managing these scarce oases required cooperation and rules, deciding who could access the water and when, organizing caravans, and protecting trade goods from the harsh journey, all demanded a new level of social organization. Leadership emerged not from conquest but from the practical need to coordinate survival. The oasis settlements grew from seasonal camps into permanent villages, then into small towns. They were prototypes, the first urban experiments in a desert world. People were not just enduring the change, they were building a new system atop the crumbling old one. They were laying the logistical and social groundwork for everything that would come next. The trade routes were more than just economic pathways. They were channels of ideas, technology, and culture, linking isolated communities into a wider web. This adaptation in the face of a drying world is a powerful testament to human resilience. But these oasis towns were just the beginning. The true metropolises, the lost cities that would capture the imagination of the world, would arise where these early networks converged at the most strategic crossroads of all. The oasis towns were proving grounds, but one civilization turned survival into an empire. In the blistering heart of the Libyan desert, where the modern map shows only emptiness, archaeologists uncovered the silent ruins of Garama. This was the capital of the Garamantes, a people so advanced they have been called the Romans of the desert. For centuries, their story was a footnote, a rumor from Greek historians who called them mere nomads. The truth, painstakingly pulled from the sand, is far more astonishing. Garama was a proper city with multi-story buildings, public spaces, and a population that likely reached into the thousands. This was not a seasonal camp, it was a permanent, bustling metropolis thriving in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Their secret was not magic, but genius, a mastery of water that feels almost futuristic. They built an underground network of tunnels called Forgaras, an irrigation system of breathtaking scale and intelligence. Teams of workers dug sloping shafts deep into the ground, sometimes for miles, to tap into ancient fossil water trapped in rock layers beneath the desert. These tunnels, gently graded to let the water flow by gravity alone, channeled this precious resource directly to their fields and settlements. It was a life support system carved into the earth itself, a technological triumph that turned the desert floor green with wheat, barley, and date palms. Archaeologist David Mattingly, who has led research in the region for decades, puts it plainly. He states that the scale of their engineering and agriculture forces us to recognize the Garamantes as a major early state, a truly urban society that challenges every stereotype about desert life. They had kings, a social hierarchy, and trade connections that stretched across the Sahara. Their Forgaras are a monumental clue etched into the landscape, proving that sophisticated urban centers did not just exist along the Nile or the Mediterranean coast. They flourished in the most unlikely place imaginable. The story of the Garamantes shatters the old idea that the Sahara could only host wandering tribes. Here was a settled, innovative civilization that looked the desert in the eye and built a lasting home. Their silent capital forces a powerful question. If one such city could remain hidden for nearly 2 millennia, how many others are still waiting, their stories buried under the next dune? The Garamantes are not an exception, they are a revelation, a signpost pointing to a lost urban world across the entire desert. But a city is more than its grand architecture, it is the sum of 1,000 daily lives. To truly hear the voices of Garama and places like it, we must listen to the quietest witnesses of all. In the soft, sifting screens of an archaeological dig, amidst the blinding sun and the whispering wind, a researcher's fingers close not around gold or jewels, but around a broken piece of pottery. It is a humble fragment, perhaps no larger than a coin, its edges worn smooth by time. One side is plain, the other bears a faded geometric pattern in ochre paint. This is not treasure in the traditional sense, yet to the trained eye, it is a manuscript more eloquent than any stone inscription. This ceramic shard was once part of a jar that held grain or water or milk. It was touched, used, and eventually broken by someone going about their day in a thriving desert metropolis. In its curve and its composition, it holds secrets. Archaeologists who specialize in material culture are forensic scientists of the everyday. They analyze the clay itself, where it was sourced from, to trace connections to distant regions. They study the shape of the vessel it came from. Was it a wide, flat plate for communal eating, or a slender, decorated flask for precious liquids? The very style of the painted pattern acts as a cultural signature. A specific design might be found hundreds of miles away, near an oasis in another part of the Sahara, creating a dotted line on a map that charts the flow of ideas and interaction. These connections are the skeleton of the ancient trade network, proven not by legend but by physical evidence. The presence of certain pottery types is a powerful indicator of lifestyle. Thick, coarse ware made for storage and cooking points to settled, agricultural communities who needed to process and keep their harvests. Lighter, more durable ceramics might belong to nomadic herders, designed for a life on the move. When these types are found mixed together at a single site, it tells a story of a marketplace, a crossroads where different ways of life met and mingled. Experts can even glean hints about social structure from these fragments. A finely made, intricately painted cup likely held a place of honor, perhaps used in shared meals that reinforced community bonds or in ceremonial practices that connected people to their beliefs. Each broken piece is a data point in a vast, scattered mosaic. Alone, it tells a small, personal story of a single meal, a single family. But when thousands of these fragments are mapped across the desert, they begin to form a picture of incredible scope. They reveal a Sahara that was not a barren void between civilizations, but a living, connective tissue humming with movement and exchange. The pottery shard is a quiet rebel against the silence of the sand. It insists that people were here living complex, interconnected lives. It turns our gaze from the monumental ruins to the intimate details, reminding us that history is built as much around the hearth as it is around the palace. If these small, scattered whispers can tell us so much, what might we learn from the places where they are found in astonishing concentration? The pottery points the way, suggesting centers of production, hubs of activity. To find the heart of these lost networks, we must look for the places where the whispers become a chorus. The world did not end with a bang, but with a slow, relentless sigh. The true power that buried the cities of the Sahara was not a single storm or a sudden cataclysm, but a planetary shift that unfolded over hundreds of human lifetimes. This was the engine of concealment, a process we call desertification. Imagine the climate as a massive, intricate machine. Around 5,000 years ago, a subtle change in Earth's orbit began to tilt the balance of that machine. The summer monsoons that had reliably watered the green Sahara grew weaker, their reach retreating steadily southward year after year, decade after decade. This was not a simple drought that could be waited out, it was a fundamental reordering of the rules of life. The effect was like a vise slowly tightening. One generation might notice the lake shore had crept further from their village. Their grandchildren would see that same lake reduced to a salty marsh. Their great-grandchildren would know only a dry, cracked basin where the water once was. Each lifetime inherited a slightly harsher, slightly drier world than the one before. This creeping aridity set in motion a brutal logic of survival. As the grasslands withered and the waterways vanished, people and animals were funneled toward the last remaining islands of life, the oases and the few reliable water sources. This consolidation around shrinking resources would have reshaped society in profound ways. It could spark innovation, as we saw with the Garamantes and their underground tunnels. But it could also create intense pressure as more people competed for less land and less water. Historical research suggests that periods of environmental stress often lead to both remarkable adaptation and, at times, to conflict between communities struggling for the same dwindling means of survival. The social fabric of these oasis cities would have been stretched taut. For a long time, human ingenuity kept pace, building the trade networks and irrigation systems that sustained urban life. But the climate machine kept turning. Eventually, in some regions, the vise tightened beyond the point of no return. The underground aquifers could be depleted, or a final, sustained period of dryness could make even the most sophisticated systems untenable. When that threshold was crossed, the cities were not destroyed, they were simply left. People gathered what they could and moved on, following the retreating promise of water southward or toward the coasts. The buildings, the market squares, the homes were surrendered to the elements. We know this timeline not from guesswork, but from reading the Earth's own diary. Scientists drilled deep into the ocean floor off the coast of West Africa, extracting long cylinders of sediment. In these muddy layers, they find a history written in dust. Each year, winds carry tiny particles from the Sahara out over the Atlantic, where they settle into the seabed. By analyzing these cores, researchers can chart a precise timeline of when the desert began to truly dominate. They can count the grains, measure their size, and determine exactly when the atmosphere above Africa became filled with sand. Other clues come from ancient lake beds within the desert itself, where the chemical signatures in the mud tell a story of evaporation and drying. This data paints a clear picture of a transformation that was gradual but absolutely decisive. It frames the disappearance of these metropolises not as a mysterious vanishing act, but as the final act of a long, slow-motion environmental drama. The sand did not swallow these cities in a day. It was a patient conqueror, advancing grain by grain over centuries, filling empty streets and covering abandoned walls until every trace was smoothed into a featureless, golden plain. This makes their rediscovery not just a finding of lost places, but a recovery of lost time, a resurrection of entire chapters of human ambition that we had assumed the desert had erased forever. If the sand was the blanket that hid them, what tools could possibly peel that blanket back to reveal the shapes of what lies beneath? The desert had won the land, but it could not stop the human mind. Centuries after the Great Drying, a new kind of metropolis rose from the sands, built not on water but on commerce. The medieval empires of West Africa gave us cities whose names still echo with legend: Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné. These were not survivors of the green world, but brilliant adaptations to the brown one, flourishing as centers of the legendary trans-Saharan salt and gold trade. Caravans of 1,000 camels, the ships of the desert, would arrive from the north bearing salt, mined from the heart of the Sahara, and worth its weight in gold in the forest kingdoms to the south. They returned southward laden with gold, ivory, and other treasures. The cities that controlled these crossroads became unimaginably wealthy, but their true legacy was not just in coin, it was in knowledge. Timbuktu was famed for its university and its libraries, where thousands of manuscripts on law, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy were penned and preserved. These were not remote outposts, they were cosmopolitan hubs of learning and faith, with grand mosques whose earthen architecture seemed to grow from the desert itself. They stand as definitive proof that large-scale, sophisticated urban life was not only possible in the Sahara, it could reach dazzling heights, yet their story is a clue to a deeper mystery. Scholars note that the locations of these great medieval cities were not chosen at random. They were almost always situated at strategic points, near reliable rivers like the Niger, or at oasis clusters that had been nodes of human activity for thousands of years. The bustling market of Timbuktu likely overlay a much older gathering place. The foundations of Djenné's great mosque may rest upon layers of habitation that stretch back to the time of the Green Sahara. These famous cities are the later, visible chapters in a very long book. They provide us with a model, a vivid picture of what an earlier, now buried Saharan metropolis might have looked like at its peak, a hub of exchange, ideas, and monumental architecture. Their historical records give us the vocabulary to understand the silence of older ruins. If cities of such grandeur could exist in a fully formed desert, then the idea of earlier, equally impressive centers fading from memory in a changing desert becomes not just plausible but inevitable. They are a bridge in time connecting the known historical world to the lost prehistoric one, showing a continuous thread of human ambition woven through the very fabric of the Sahara. Their existence whispers that the roots of this urban tradition run far deeper than their own foundations. So we have the green paradise, the proof of its people, the ingenious civilizations that adapted, and the legendary cities that followed. But to find what came before them, to locate those silent, buried roots, we must learn to see the desert with new eyes. We must look from a perspective not of the earth but from the sky. A faint geometric shadow on a computer screen changed everything. In a quiet office far from the desert heat, an archaeologist stared at a satellite image of a featureless stretch of sand. There, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a perfect square, a subtle discoloration in the Earth's tone. From the ground, this spot would look like any other part of the endless dune sea. But from 500 miles in orbit, it screamed of human design. This was the new frontier, the moment satellite archaeology turned the entire Sahara into a treasure map. The technology behind this revelation has a name: light detection and ranging, or LIDAR. It works by sending hundreds of thousands of laser pulses from an aircraft down to the ground. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to bounce back, it can create an extraordinarily precise three-dimensional map of the surface, stripping away vegetation and even digitally removing modern features to reveal the bare earth beneath. In a desert, this can expose the ghostly footprints of walls, roads, and entire settlement layouts that have been smoothed over by centuries of wind. Another powerful tool is multispectral imaging. Satellites can capture light wavelengths far beyond what our eyes can see. Different materials like buried stone, compacted earth from old walls, or even subtle changes in soil moisture reflect these invisible wavelengths in unique ways. A patch of ground that looks uniformly golden in a photograph might glow with a distinct signature in infrared, revealing the outline of a long collapsed building. These technologies have shattered the old limits of exploration. Before, finding a site meant walking the desert on foot, a monumental task in such a vast and dangerous landscape. Now, researchers can scan thousands of square miles from a desk, identifying promising targets with scientific precision. It turns the search from a hopeful gamble into a focused investigation. A stunning example of this power is the mapping of the ancient river systems we discussed earlier, the so-called rivers of the Sahara. Satellite data didn't just confirm these paleo-channels existed, it revealed something astonishing along their banks. Clustered near the bends and confluences of these fossil rivers, analysts began to spot dense concentrations of these anomalous signatures. These are not random patterns. They suggest the presence of foundations, enclosures, and what appear to be field systems, lining the vanished waterways like beads on a string. Each cluster is a potential settlement, a community that thrived when the river flowed. This high-tech survey has effectively sketched a hidden grid across the desert, a network of ancient activity that rewrites the map of human history. The sand is no longer an impenetrable blanket but a semi-transparent veil. We are witnessing a profound shift from digging in the dirt to first seeing through it. These satellite eyes are guiding shovels to the right spots, turning speculation into discovery. But what happens when the shovels finally break ground at one of these digital waypoints? The satellite gives us the shape, the blueprint. To hear the story, we must listen to the Earth itself. The greatest loss may not be the cities themselves, but the thoughts they held. We have traced the outlines of walls and the patterns of trade, but the true heart of a civilization often resides in its words. While the medieval libraries of Timbuktu astonish us with their surviving manuscripts, they represent the end of a long intellectual tradition, not its beginning. What of the libraries that came before? Civilizations as sophisticated as the Garamantes did not administer a network of cities and tunnels with memory alone. They almost certainly kept records, tallies of trade, accounts of harvest stored in their ingenious underground systems, legal codes, and perhaps even stories or songs. These documents would have been their operating manual, their history book, and their cultural soul. Yet we have found almost none of them. This is the haunting silence at the core of our mystery. The likely reason is the very nature of their writing materials. In an environment without abundant trees for paper, they would have used what was at hand, materials like leather parchment, wooden tablets, or even papyrus if trade brought it from the Nile Valley. These are organic, perishable things. In most of the world, such items vanish in centuries, consumed by moisture, insects, and time. But the Sahara is not most of the world. This presents a tantalizing, almost paradoxical possibility. The same climate that doomed these cities by sucking away their water might also be the very thing that preserved their voices. In the hyper-arid, perfectly dry conditions of a sealed tomb or a buried, sheltered chamber, organic materials can enter a state of suspended animation. Leather can remain supple, papyrus can stay intact, waiting in the dark for thousands of years. We know this is possible because we have seen it happen elsewhere. The Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in desert caves, survived for 2 millennia. The dry sands of Egypt have yielded countless texts on papyrus, so the question transforms from a lament about loss into a thrilling scientific speculation. Somewhere beneath the dunes that cover a forgotten Garamantian archive or a scribe's chamber in an older Oasis town, there could be a cache of documents, perfectly dried and protected, holding the unread thoughts of a lost world. What would those texts contain? Beyond inventories and royal decrees, might there be observations of the stars from a clear desert sky, different from those of Babylon or Egypt? Could there be philosophical treatises on governance and community, composed as the world outside grew drier? Perhaps there are narratives describing the green Sahara from the perspective of those who watched it fade, a first-hand account of environmental change that we can only reconstruct through geology. The pursuit of these lost libraries adds a profound new layer to the archaeological quest. It is no longer just about mapping streets and buildings. It is about the potential to recover a chapter of the human mind. Every scan from a satellite, every careful excavation in a promising ruin, is driven by this hope to find not just a city, but its conversation. This transforms the sand from a mere blanket into a potential guardian, a silent curator holding volumes we have not yet learned to read. The search for these cities, therefore, becomes a race not just against time, but for time, an effort to reclaim the intellectual legacy of those who looked at the same stars and asked the same fundamental questions we do, but from the heart of a world we thought was empty. High in the jagged peaks of the Tibesti Mountains, the desert keeps its secrets in stone. This remote volcanic range in the central Sahara is a world apart, a fortress of deep canyons and hidden valleys that long served as a refuge when the lowlands dried to dust. And here, etched against the sky, stand silent sentinels that defy the emptiness. Scattered across the high plateaus are megaliths, imposing stone monuments and tombs that speak of a people who were far more than wanderers. These are not random piles of rock. You see circles of upright stones, some taller than a person, arranged with clear intention. You find burial mounds constructed with layers of carefully selected stone, marking the final resting place of individuals held in clear esteem. This is the work of the Tainarian culture, a people who made these mountains their home and their canvas. The sheer physicality of these sites is the first powerful clue. Moving these stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, required more than a few individuals. It demanded coordinated community labor, a shared plan, and the social organization to see it through. This level of effort is a hallmark of a settled society, one with a hierarchy and a collective purpose. You do not invest such backbreaking work in a landscape you plan to abandon next season. These monuments represent a commitment to place, a declaration that this rugged terrain was their home. But the stones tell a deeper story than just social structure. Their arrangement and their association with memorial sites point to a complex belief system. Archaeologists studying these sites note that the placement often aligns with celestial events or significant features in the harsh landscape, suggesting a ceremonial practice connecting the community to the cosmos and to their ancestors. The care taken in these constructions indicates a profound respect for the journey after life, a cultural value that united the living and honored those who came before. This spiritual dimension transforms the sites from simple landmarks into profound cultural statements. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of these mountain monuments is how they connect to a wider world. Expert analysis of the styles, the construction techniques, and the symbolic motifs reveals striking parallels with megalithic traditions developing far to the east along the Nile Valley. The similarities are too precise to be coincidence. They suggest a flow of ideas, a cultural exchange that moved across the vast desert, likely along those very trade and migration routes we discussed earlier. It paints a picture of a Sahara that was not a barrier but a connective corridor where mountain communities in the Tibesti were participants in a broader conversation of belief and technology. These silent stone circles, therefore, are durable anchors in a landscape of forgetting. They mark territories, they encode beliefs, and they memorialize individuals whose names are lost to time. Their presence in this remote refuge forces a dramatic reconsideration of the Saharan map. We are prompted to see these mountainous regions not as marginal hideouts for people on the edge of survival, but as cultural heartlands in their own right. In the face of a changing climate, these communities retreated to the high ground and did more than just survive. They built monuments to their identity, ensuring that even as the sands shifted below, their memory would be carved in the one thing the desert could not easily erase: stone. If such enduring statements could be made in the mountains, what traces might have been left in the now buried valleys where life first began? The search for those traces leads us to a tool that can listen to the echoes of the earth itself. The mastery of water was the true architecture of these cities. Beyond the famous underground tunnels, ancient Saharan societies developed a diverse and ingenious portfolio of water technologies, each tailored to their specific corner of a changing world. In mountainous regions, they engineered sophisticated catchment systems, carving channels and basins into rock faces to capture every precious drop of sporadic rainfall, channeling it into reservoirs for the dry months. Across vast plains, they dug deep wells, some reaching astonishing depths, tapping into subterranean layers to create new points of life in the emptiness. And along the paths of seasonal rivers known as wadis, they practiced a form of anticipatory agriculture. They would construct low walls and diversion channels to capture the sudden, fierce floods that followed distant storms, spreading the silt-laden water over fields to nourish crops before it vanished back into the earth. This was not mere survival engineering, it was hydrological banking. Water was the ultimate currency of the desert, and these systems were the vaults and investment portfolios. Controlling its flow meant controlling the possibility of surplus. When a community can reliably produce more food than it immediately needs, everything changes. That surplus fuels specialization. Not everyone has to farm. Some can become potters, crafting the vessels to store the grain and water. Others can become artisans, metalworkers, or traders, exchanging surplus goods for materials from afar. This division of labor requires coordination, record-keeping, and rules, which in turn gives rise to administrators, planners, and leaders. In essence, the management of water directly funded the creation of social complexity. The individual who could organize the cleaning of a communal well or the fair distribution of wadi floodwater was not just a technician, they were a foundational pillar of urban power. Their infrastructure, now dry and buried, was the literal and economic skeleton upon which the bustling flesh of the metropolis was built. Every silent canal and filled-in cistern we find is a testament to a collective agreement, a communal investment in a future they hope to secure. It represents a triumph of planning over chaos, a decision to build a shared tomorrow in a landscape that offered no guarantees. This transformation of a fundamental challenge into a catalyst for civilization is perhaps their most enduring legacy. It forces us to see these sites not as ruins, but as the fossilized imprint of a brilliant societal mind, a network of thought and cooperation that once turned scarcity into abundance. And if their water systems formed the skeleton of their cities, what formed the lifeblood that flowed through its streets? The answer lies not in the ground, but in the movement of people and ideas across impossible distances. The iconic symbol of the desert was not always there. The single-humped dromedary camel, the very image of Saharan travel, is actually a relative newcomer to this ancient story. While its ancestors roamed North America millions of years ago, the domesticated camel was not introduced to the Sahara until around the 3rd century before the Common Era, likely from the Arabian Peninsula. Its arrival was nothing short of a transportation revolution. Before the camel, the arteries of Saharan trade pulsed with a slower, more arduous rhythm. Goods moved on the backs of donkeys and on the shoulders of human porters, limiting the distance and weight of any journey across the truly waterless stretches. The camel changed the equation entirely. With its legendary ability to go days without water, carry immense loads, and traverse soft sand with its wide, padded feet, the camel transformed impossible routes into reliable highways. It supercharged the existing network, enabling caravans to travel directly across the deep desert, bypassing circuitous paths and connecting markets with unprecedented efficiency. This innovation helped fuel the golden age of later empires like Ghana and Mali, whose wealth was built on the trans-Saharan trade in gold and salt. But here is the crucial nuance that reshapes our understanding. The camel did not create Saharan urban life, it amplified it. The cities we have been discussing, the Garamantian metropolis and the earlier Oasis towns, were built and thrived for centuries before the first caravan camel arrived. Their initial achievements, their social complexity, and their architectural wonders were accomplished with donkeys, with boats on vanished rivers, and with human endurance. This makes their accomplishments even more impressive. They built interconnected societies in a challenging environment using the tools they had, laying the groundwork that the camel would later exploit. The camel's introduction represents a brilliant technological adaptation, a tool that allowed Saharan civilization to not just persist, but to flourish in its most extreme, arid form. It shows a history of continuous innovation, where each phase of urban growth was supported by a new solution to an old problem. The story is not one of a single invention sparking civilization, but of a resilient human tradition repeatedly finding ways to thrive, with the camel serving as a powerful, late-arriving engine for a machine that was already in motion. This technological timeline forces us to see distinct chapters in the Sahara's story, each with its own tools and triumphs, waiting to be read in the layers of the sand. The true scale of the Garamantian world reveals itself not in a single ruin, but in a sprawling ghost map. In the Wadi al-Hayat, the river of life in southwestern Libya, the desert floor tells a story of astonishing density. Archaeological surveys here have not simply found a capital city, they have uncovered a lost metropolitan region. The valley is littered with the silent remains of hundreds of settlements, from small villages and imposing hilltop fortresses to extensive cemeteries that mark the presence of generations. These sites are not randomly scattered, they are intricately connected by the very lifelines that made life possible, the underground Forgaras. Picture this network not as isolated threads, but as a vast subterranean web, with its channels feeding a constellation of communities across the arid landscape. Where the water could be reliably brought to the surface, towns grew. The pattern is unmistakable, a deliberate, organized sprawl. This density is the fifth and perhaps most overwhelming clue. It transforms our understanding from a story about a clever city-state into evidence of a highly populated, centrally coordinated civilization. The distribution of these ghost cities allows researchers to move beyond guesswork. By mapping the size and type of each site, from fortified strongholds to agricultural hamlets, archaeologists can begin to model the valley's ancient population and its settlement patterns. They can see where people lived, where they defended, and where they honored their predecessors. The calculations that emerge are staggering. Some estimates suggest the Garamantian heartland may have supported a population numbering in the tens of thousands, perhaps even approaching 100,000 people at its peak. This scale forces a dramatic re-evaluation of the Sahara's entire demographic history. It suggests that during its flourishing periods, this desert could host levels of human occupation that rivaled contemporary societies in other parts of the ancient world. The silent stones of the Wadi al-Hayat make the loss tangible, not as the disappearance of a lone outpost, but as the fading of a bustling, interconnected world. It turns an abstract historical idea into an immediate, vast emptiness you can feel. To stand in that valley today, seeing only sand and a few scattered walls, while knowing it once teemed with life, is to confront the profound power of environmental change. This clue provides the critical context of scale. We are not searching for a handful of lost cities. We are piecing together the map of a forgotten nation. The very sand that buried these cities may have also saved them. This is the great paradox of the desert, where the agent of loss becomes an instrument of preservation. In the relentless heat and the bone-dry air, the normal rules of decay are suspended. Organic materials that would rot away in a matter of years in a temperate climate can enter a state of perfect pause. Without moisture, the bacteria and fungi that cause decomposition cannot survive. The result is a natural mummification process where the desert itself acts as a desiccating seal. A piece of woven textile, a leather sandal, a basket of grain, even the remains of a meal left behind in a sudden departure, all could be dried and preserved almost indefinitely under the protective blanket of sand. This transforms the dunes from a simple shroud into a potential time capsule of astonishing fidelity. One of the most profound examples of this phenomenon was discovered in a rock shelter in the Tadrat Akakis Mountains of Libya. Here, researchers found the naturally mummified body of a young child, now known as the Yuan Muhugag mummy. The significance of this find is staggering. Scientific analysis dates this individual to around 5,500 years ago, which means this preservation occurred centuries before the sophisticated mummification practices of ancient Egypt were fully developed. This was not the result of elaborate embalming rituals, but the simple, powerful chemistry of the Saharan environment. The dry air and consistent conditions gently drew the moisture from the tissues, leaving behind a poignant snapshot of a life from a lost world. It is a silent testament to the preserving power of the desert. This potential rewrites the entire narrative of discovery. In most archaeological sites around the world, especially in wetter regions, we recover the durable remnants of a culture, the stone, the pottery, the metal. The organic heart of daily life, the wood, the cloth, the food, is almost always gone, consumed by time. But a city buried quickly and completely by the shifting sands of the Sahara presents a radically different possibility. Imagine uncovering a market stall not just with broken pots, but with the faded remnants of the fabrics that were sold there. Envision finding a home with wooden tools still resting where they were last placed, or a storage room with the faint, desiccated remains of ancient seeds. The level of detail locked within such a site would be unparalleled, offering a three-dimensional, tactile window into a vanished daily reality. This shifts our perspective from mourning a loss to anticipating a recovery. The desert did not merely erase these metropolises, it may have placed them in deep storage, safeguarding their most fragile treasures until the moment we develop the tools and the curiosity to find them. Each dune becomes a potential vault, its contents frozen in a moment from millennia ago, waiting for the key of careful science to turn. The sand, once seen only as a concealer, reveals its dual role as a guardian. This means the most intimate stories of the Green Sahara and its descendants might not be lost at all, but simply waiting perfectly still for us to listen. The marketplace of a Saharan metropolis was a symphony of languages and a gallery of the world. In the dusty central square of a city like Garama, you would not have found a simple local bazaar. Instead, you would have witnessed a true global crossroads in action. A merchant from the Phoenician coast might be unpacking delicate glass vessels, their colors catching the fierce sun. Nearby, a trader from the Niger River bend could be displaying finely wrought gold ornaments, while a local Berber craftsman offered leather goods tanned with ancient Saharan techniques. This was the daily reality. These cities did not exist in isolation. They thrived because they were the vital connectors, the trading posts where the economies of the Mediterranean world and sub-Saharan Africa met and mingled. The flow was not just one way, and it was not just about objects. With every caravan came people, and with every person came their worldview. The goods themselves were carriers of culture. A Roman coin was not just currency, it was a tiny piece of art, politics, and technology. A bolt of cloth from Egypt brought with it the dyes, the weaving patterns, and the aesthetic tastes of the Nile Valley. This constant, tangible exchange made these urban centers inherently cosmopolitan. They were melting pots where a resident might hear the click of a local Berber dialect, the cadence of Latin from a Roman official, and the persuasive barter of a Nubian merchant, all before the noon sun reached its peak. This cultural blending is etched permanently into the archaeological record, most visibly in architecture and spiritual life. In the ruins of Garamantian towns, researchers have found building techniques that show clear Roman influence, such as the use of arches and certain fortification styles, adapted and merged with traditional local methods of mud, brick, and stone construction. It was not a simple copy, but a creative fusion, a new architectural language born of contact. Even more profound is the evidence of religious syncretism. Ancient Saharan spiritual beliefs, which often revered natural forces and ancestors, encountered the pantheons of Rome and the later, powerful wave of Islamic faith. What emerged in these hubs was not always a replacement of one system by another, but often a fascinating layering or blending of practices. An individual might honor local traditions tied to a sacred spring or a mountain peak, while also participating in newer, introduced rituals. This cultural fluidity demonstrates a sophisticated, pragmatic worldview. The people of these cities were not passive recipients of foreign ideas. They were active participants, selecting, adapting, and integrating influences into a unique and resilient Saharan identity. This redefines the entire desert. The Sahara was never the impenetrable barrier of our old maps. It was a dynamic sea of sand, and its cities were the ports. They were the pillars that held up a bridge of human connection stretching across a continent. To understand them as mere ruins is to miss their essence. They were living, breathing forums where Africa spoke to itself and to the wider world, a continuous conversation that shaped art, commerce, and belief for millennia. Their silence today is not a sign of irrelevance, but a lost volume in the library of human connection. South of the Great Desert, where the sands begin to give way to savanna, a legend took solid form. The Ghana Empire, known to its people as Wagadu, rose to become a powerhouse of the medieval world, and its story is inseparable from the very trade winds of the Sahara. While its heartland lay in the Sahel, its lifeblood flowed from the north along those ancient, sun-baked routes. The empire's legendary capital, come by sail, was not a remote, isolated seat of power. It was a deliberate creation, a grand terminal built at the precise point where the punishing desert journey met the fertile lands of gold. For centuries, it thrived as the ultimate marketplace, the controlled gateway where the salt of the Sahara and the gold of West Africa's forests were exchanged. Arab geographers of the time wrote of a city of astonishing wealth, where the king could command a force of 200,000 warriors, and where even the dogs in the royal court wore collars of gold and silver. This was not mere myth. Excavations at Come By Sale reveal the stone foundations of a sophisticated urban center. archaeologists have mapped a clear division between a bustling merchant quarter and a royal district, complete with a palace complex and a central mosque, all laid out with an understanding of urban planning. The very stones speak of a society with the resources and organization to build for permanence and grandeur. The empire's might was a direct product of its mastery over the desert's logistics. It did not just engage in trade, it monopolized it. By controlling the southern termini of the trans-Saharan routes, the rulers of Wagadu taxed every ounce of gold and every block of salt that passed through their territory. This strategic chokehold on continental commerce generated the revenue to support a government, a military, and a cosmopolitan court that attracted scholars and diplomats from across the Islamic world. This clue, the Ghana Empire, is a critical evolutionary link in our story. It demonstrates with historical clarity the full potential of a polity whose roots were nourished by Saharan trade. It shows us the end result of a process that began with small oasis towns bartering for survival. Wagadu is the magnificent, documented proof of concept. It provides a vivid, historically attested model for what a Saharan-connected metropolis could become when scale, strategy, and wealth reached an imperial level. This forces a powerful reflection. If a civilization of such scale and sophistication could emerge at the desert's southern fringe in the early medieval period, what might have been possible 1,000 years earlier, deeper within the Sahara itself, when the climate was less severe and the networks were first being woven? The empire stands as a brilliant later chapter, urging us to look back north into the empty dunes with new eyes, searching not for mythical cities, but for the earlier, perhaps equally complex progenitors that made such an empire conceivable. The lost kingdom of Wagadu is not an end point but a signpost pointing back into the silence from which it emerged. The words they spoke are still whispering across the desert. Beyond the silent stones and the buried pottery, another kind of artifact survives, one that is carried in the very breath of living people. This is the evidence of language, a subtle but powerful tool for mapping the ancient Sahara. Philologists, the detectives of human speech, listen to the echoes of the past preserved in modern tongues and in the records of languages now gone. Their work reveals that the sands concealed not just cities, but entire conversations that once crisscrossed the dunes. Take the Guanche language, once spoken by the indigenous people of the Canary Islands. These islands lie off the coast of West Africa, and though separated by ocean, the Guanche language showed clear affiliations with the Berber languages of the mainland Sahara. This linguistic link is a profound clue. It suggests that the Canary Islands were not isolated, but were likely reached by Saharan peoples, perhaps using maritime skills or during a period when sea levels were different, carrying their language with them as a living snapshot of their origin. It places these islands within the broader cultural sphere of the ancient desert. On the mainland, the story grows even richer. The Berber languages, spoken across North Africa to this day, are a tapestry woven with threads from countless interactions. By analyzing loanwords, terms borrowed from one language into another, researchers can reconstruct ancient contact zones, for instance, shared vocabulary for specific, drought-resistant crops or for particular metalworking tools between Berber and Nilo-Saharan language families points to a deep history of exchange. These are not words for generic ideas, but for specific technologies and subsistence strategies. Such shared terminology strongly suggests that these groups were not strangers, but were in sustained contact, learning from one another and trading knowledge as surely as they traded goods. A word for a specialized well-digging technique or a unique type of grindstone can travel along a trade route just as easily as the object itself, leaving a permanent imprint in speech. This philological detective work allows us to sketch cultural zones and migration routes that leave no physical ruins. The distribution of a language family is a map of human movement over centuries. Where related languages are found far apart with divergent dialects in between, it tells a story of expansion, separation, and adaptation. Linguists can even use techniques to estimate roughly when language families split, adding a tentative timeline to these human journeys. It is a way of listening to the wind for patterns, of hearing the ghost of a marketplace negotiation or a shared lesson in agriculture passed from one generation to the next. Language becomes a fossil of human interaction, more durable in some ways than stone, because it replicates itself with every new speaker. It carries the logic of a worldview, the priorities of a culture, and the memory of old friendships and alliances. When we find a Berber word for a plant that only grows in the Sahel, or a Nilo-Saharan term for a Saharan mining practice, we are glimpsing a moment of connection, a handshake of ideas across an expanse we now call empty. This subtle clue reminds us that the greatest loss may be the stories themselves, the epic poems, the family histories, and the names they gave to the stars and the dunes. The cities were the stage, but language was the play performed upon it, a vibrant, living network of meaning that the shifting sands could not entirely erase. Far to the east, where the Egyptian Sahara meets the Nubian desert, a different kind of calendar marks the passage of millennia. At a place called Nabta, the oldest stones in our story stand in silent conference. This site is not a city in the traditional sense, but its message is monumental. Over 7,000 years ago, long before the first pyramid was a dream in a pharaoh's mind, a community of pastoralists gathered here. They did not build walls, but they constructed something arguably more profound, a sophisticated array of megaliths and stone circles aligned with celestial precision. Researchers studying the site have mapped lines of stones that point toward the rising sun of the summer solstice, and slabs that seem to mark the positions of important stars. This careful, deliberate arrangement suggests these early Saharans were not merely surviving the rhythms of nature, they were measuring them, turning the sky itself into a tool for understanding their world. To call Nabta an observatory feels almost modern, yet the evidence carved into the bedrock compels us to consider it. These people moved massive stones, some weighing several tons, across a seasonal lake bed. The labor and coordinated planning required for such a feat speak of a society with shared goals, leadership, and a deep communal investment in knowledge. Their calendar of stone allowed them to predict the coming of the vital summer rains, timing the movement of their herds to the greening of the savanna that once existed here. This is the seventh and perhaps most humbling clue, a testament to intellectual achievement in a landscape we have long dismissed as a backdrop to history. Nabta predates Stonehenge by millennia and the Great Pyramids by centuries. Its existence shatters a persistent myth that complex, organized thought and astronomical sophistication could only emerge in the fertile valleys of great rivers like the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates. Here, in what is now a hyper-arid desert, we find proof of a different cradle. These early pastoralists were proto-urban in their thinking, establishing a ceremonial and intellectual center that served a scattered population. They were laying a cognitive foundation, a shared understanding of time and space that could later support the growth of settled towns and trade networks. Nabta represents the deep root system from which the later metropolises could grow. It was buried first by the shifting sands as the savanna vanished, and then again by our own historical narratives that overlooked the desert's potential. This circle of stones forces a quiet revolution in perspective. It asks us to see the Sahara not as a void that separated advanced cultures, but as an original source of innovation, a place where human curiosity first looked to the stars and built its understanding in stone, creating a legacy that would, much later, echo in the streets of forgotten cities. A Garamantian noble's final resting place held treasure from across the known world. In the dry earth of a Saharan tomb, an archaeologist's brush reveals not gold, but a small, iridescent fragment of Roman glass, its color still vibrant after 2,000 years. Nearby lies a string of carnelian beads, their fiery red hue sourced from mines 1,000 miles to the east, and a single cowrie shell, its smooth surface whispering of the warm Indian Ocean. These were not random trinkets, but statements of identity and connection, placed with care for the journey ahead. Each object is a historical breadcrumb, a tiny, durable piece of evidence that maps a web of commerce stretching far beyond the desert's borders. To understand their significance, you must trace their impossible journeys. That Roman glass likely began as raw sand on a Mediterranean beach, was fused and blown by an artisan in a workshop in Italy or Egypt, then packed carefully onto a ship. It was offloaded at a North African port like Leptis Magna, transferred to the back of a donkey, and finally, after a grueling overland trek through the desert, arrived in the hands of a Garamantian trader. The cowrie shell traveled even farther, passing through countless hands from the Indian Ocean, across the Red Sea, and up the Nile Valley before entering the Saharan network. The carnelian beads tell a story of specialized mining and lapidary skill in distant regions like the Indus Valley or the Arabian Peninsula. Their presence in a Saharan grave is a testament to their immense value, a value measured not just in material but in the staggering distance overcome. These artifacts allow researchers to reconstruct trade routes with scientific precision. By analyzing the chemical signature of copper ingots found in the ruins, experts can match them to specific mines in Cyprus or Sardinia. The distinctive shape and ceramic fabric of an Italian olive oil amphory shard, discovered in the capital of Garama, is as clear a marker as a shipping manifest, confirming direct or indirect trade with the heart of the Roman Empire. Each identified object adds a new line to the map, connecting dots between mines, ports, workshops, and oases. This catalogue of exotic goods reveals the economic engine of the lost cities. They were not self-sufficient villages, but integrated hubs that thrived on moving luxury items and necessities across a continent. They provided security, water, and marketplaces for the caravans, taking a share of the wealth that passed through. The variety and origin of these goods prove these were cosmopolitan centers, where a local chieftain might anoint themselves with Mediterranean perfumes stored in delicate glass ungentaria, while their spouse wore jewelry fashioned from materials born of 3 different oceans. This transforms our view of the ancient economy from a simple local exchange to a complex, globalizing system, with the Sahara at its connective heart. The physical breadcrumbs left in the sand make the subsequent silence deafening. How does a network of such reach and sophistication, a system capable of delivering shells from the Indian Ocean to a grave in the middle of the Libyan desert, simply vanish from collective memory? The artifacts insist on their world's importance, making its disappearance not a minor historical footnote, but a profound puzzle written in glass, stone, and shell. The grand trade networks and stone monuments were built by living, breathing communities. To walk through a city like Garama at its peak would have been an experience of vibrant, organized chaos. Your ears would be filled with a symphony of sounds, the rhythmic pounding of grain in stone mortars, the sharp clink of a metalworker's hammer, and the animated chatter of a dozen languages haggling in the marketplace over bolts of dyed cloth and gleaming beads. Your eyes would take in the careful order of it all, the wider streets leading to administrative buildings, the narrower alleys winding through residential quarters, and everywhere, the guiding presence of the water channels that made this life possible. This social world was not flat but structured, a delicate pyramid built upon the twin pillars of water and commerce. At its apex sat the rulers and a priestly class, those who coordinated the digging of the vital Forgaras and mediated between the people and the forces of nature they revered. Below them were the merchants, the cosmopolitan connectors who sourced exotic goods and information from across the desert. Then came the skilled artisans, the potters, weavers, and metalworkers who turned raw materials into the objects of daily use and status. Supporting this entire structure were the farmers and laborers, the majority whose hands tended the irrigated fields and maintained the life-giving water systems that fed the city. This hierarchy was not necessarily rigid or cruel, but a practical organization for survival in an unforgiving environment. It ensured that the most critical tasks, water management and long-distance trade, were directed with a clear chain of command. Evidence of this social layering comes to us quietly from the places of rest. Archaeologists studying burial sites across the Sahara note clear differences in how individuals were prepared for their journey. Some were interred with simple, personal items, a single pot or a worn tool. Others were laid to rest in more elaborate tombs, sometimes built with stone, accompanied by a wealth of grave goods, from imported jewelry to fine ceramics and even remnants of ceremonial meals. These differences in treatment strongly suggest a community that recognized distinct social roles or statuses in life, honoring them in death. Yet other clues from these resting places speak to a shared human experience. Analysis of remains reveals the common health challenges of a pre-modern world, signs of physical stress from labor, and the dental wear from a diet rich in grains ground by stone querns. These are not just data points, they are intimate portraits. They tell us of a people who worked hard, who faced the universal trials of their era, and who found ways to build a shared identity and purpose. This social reconstruction transforms anonymous ruins back into a neighborhood. You can almost hear the children playing in a dusty courtyard, smell the bread baking in a communal oven, and feel the collective anxiety and hope as the community watched the sky for rain or prepared for the arrival of a distant caravan. They experienced joy in craft and ceremony, worry over scarce resources, and pride in their collective achievement. Seeing them this way, as our counterparts across a vast gulf of time, fundamentally changes the mystery. It is no longer just about finding lost cities, but about recovering lost neighbors. Their story of building a complex, cooperative life in one of Earth's most challenging landscapes is a profound testament to shared human resilience. It forges a connection that makes their ultimate disappearance not an abstract historical event, but a deeply human echo. And if we can hear that echo in the stones and the graves, what might we learn from the very symbols they left behind, the images and patterns that encoded their view of the universe? High on the windswept plateaus of the Mesak, the desert reveals a landscape of watchful stones. Scattered across these remote highlands are the remains of hilltop fortresses, their walls now tumbled but their strategic purpose still chillingly clear. These are not the open, welcoming layouts of oasis towns, but places built for defense, commanding sweeping views of the surrounding plains. Their very architecture tells a story of a society under pressure. Thick, reinforced walls were not built to keep out the wind but other people. The choice of location itself, on difficult-to-reach heights, speaks of a primary concern for security over convenience. This widespread network of fortified settlements and watchtowers forms a powerful eighth clue, one that adds a necessary shadow to our picture of Saharan civilization. It contradicts any notion of a purely peaceful, untroubled golden age. Instead, it points to a time of competition and, at times, conflict, likely intensified as the environment grew harsher. When water and fertile land become scarce, they become worth fighting for. These forts were the strongholds of communities determined to protect their most vital assets, their stored grain, their herds, and above all, their access to the life-giving wells and Forgaras. The archaeology within these sites often bears this out. Researchers sometimes find caches of projectile points, evidence of reinforced gates, and signs of hurried repairs or even destruction layers in the soil, all suggesting periods of tension. This does not mean these societies were constantly at war, but it does mean defense was a regular and serious consideration in their planning. It illustrates a darker, more pragmatic chapter in their history, one of constant adaptation not just to the climate but to each other. The presence of these forts forces us to see their world in the round with all its complexity. Their history was not one of untroubled prosperity, but of calculated struggle, where periods of vibrant trade and cultural exchange could coexist with the need to guard one's home from a rival or a desperate neighbor. This layer of social pressure adds a critical dimension to our understanding of why some areas were eventually abandoned. When the environmental squeeze combined with sustained social strain, the balance could tip. A community might decide that defending a dwindling water source was no longer worth the cost, choosing instead to join with allies or migrate entirely. These silent fortresses, therefore, are monuments to resilience as much as they are to fear. They represent a decision to dig in and fight for a way of life, to invest immense labor in fortifying a home in the hope of securing a future. Their enduring stone frames ask us to consider the full weight of the challenges these people faced, not just from the sky above, but from the human landscape around them. It makes their achievements in building cities and trade networks all the more remarkable, knowing they had to be defended. And if the stones of conflict have survived, what of the softer, more perishable traces of their spiritual world, the beliefs that offered solace and meaning in such a demanding life? The desert's silence gave birth to some of history's most enduring legends. For centuries, travelers from the Arab world returned with tales not of empty dunes, but of fabulous cities shimmering in the heat haze, built entirely of copper or gold. European mapmakers, filling the blank spaces of their charts, spoke of a mighty Christian kingdom ruled by the mythical Prester John, a wealthy empire hidden somewhere beyond the sands. These were not pure inventions. They were attempts to make sense of a landscape that held undeniable clues of past grandeur. When a nomadic trader stumbled upon a scatter of ancient metal slag or a fragment of gilded pottery half buried by the wind, what else could they conclude but that a city of unimaginable wealth must have once stood there? The stories grew in the telling, transforming archaeological reality into the stuff of myth. This folklore represents a powerful psychological clue. The disappearance of these places was so total, so absolute, that human memory could not simply forget them, it had to mythologize them. The emptiness demanded an explanation, and the imagination provided one. Among the Tuareg people, the legendary guardians of the Central Sahara, oral histories speak with clarity of lands that were once green, of ancestors who lived in settled towns, and of how the sands slowly took it all back. These are not vague fairy tales, but specific narratives passed down through generations, often tied to particular landmarks or regions. They serve as a living, cultural memory of a world that archaeology is only now beginning to physically uncover. The kernel of truth within the legend of a copper city might be the memory of the Garamantes, whose advanced metallurgy and trade in copper goods were renowned. The fantasy of Prester John's kingdom could be a distorted echo of real diplomatic and trade contacts between medieval Europe and the powerful and very real Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, filtered through the vast, mysterious filter of the Sahara. These myths are therefore a form of wayfinding. They are cultural maps that say something important happened here. They remind us that history is not just written in stone and pottery, but in song and story. The blending of fact and fantasy around these lost metropolises shows how a civilization, when it vanishes from sight, does not vanish from the human mind. It retreats into the realm of legend, waiting for the day when the trowel and the satellite image can bring its true story back into the light. This intertwining of memory and sand adds a profound layer to the puzzle, reminding us that we are searching not just for cities, but for the echoes they left in the dreams of those who came after. The decision to leave a home is rarely made in a single day. As the lifeblood of the Sahara slowly evaporated, its people faced a slow-motion crisis that unfolded over centuries. This was not a sudden, panicked flight, but a strategic, generational recalibration of how and where to live. Environmental anthropology provides a powerful lens for understanding these choices, revealing a spectrum of adaptation rather than a simple tale of defeat. Communities did not vanish, they transformed, their movements quietly rewriting the human map of an entire continent. One primary strategy was consolidation. As smaller water sources failed, people gathered around the few remaining permanent oases, those islands fed by deep, ancient aquifers. These hubs swelled in size and importance, evolving from seasonal camps into the fortified towns and trade centers we've discussed. This inward migration created the critical mass needed for urban life, but it also meant that the vast hinterlands, the smaller villages and farmsteads that once dotted the greener landscape, were gradually abandoned. The population condensed into stronger, more defensible nodes, leaving a widening ring of emptiness around them. For others, the solution was a more dramatic geographic shift. A long-term southward migration pushed populations toward the desert's margins, into the Sahel belt and toward the great river valleys like the Niger and the Nile. These regions, while also experiencing change, offered more reliable water. This movement was likely a slow drift, a community moving its herds a little further each generation, following the retreating promise of rainfall. The material culture they carried with them, specific pottery styles or tool-making techniques, acts as a trail of breadcrumbs. When archaeologists find a distinct Saharan ceramic design in an early settlement along the Nile, it marks not just trade but the movement of people and their knowledge, a quiet integration into a new homeland. A third adaptation was to embrace motion itself, transitioning from settled agricultural life to full pastoral nomadism. This was a brilliant, pragmatic surrender to the new rules of the desert. By constantly moving herds between scattered patches of seasonal grazing and remaining waterholes, communities could extract a living from an environment that could no longer support fixed towns. The iconic nomadic cultures of the Sahara, like the Tuareg, may have their deep roots in this era of profound adaptation. Their entire social structure and material culture, portable tents, minimal pottery, a focus on leather and textiles became a mobile solution to a spreading dryness. These models show us a population acting with resilience and agency. They were not helpless victims of a catastrophe, but pragmatic actors making a series of difficult, calculated choices across hundreds of years. The depopulation of the core urban areas was the end result of this long-term demographic reshaping. A city like Garama might have held on for centuries through ingenious engineering, but as maintaining the Forgaras grew more difficult and trade routes shifted, the reasons to stay dwindled. Families likely left in stages, some seeking opportunity in the bustling oasis down the trade route, others joining kin who had already moved south. The final families to leave would have closed the doors on quiet streets, taking what they could carry and following the paths their relatives had already established. This perspective transforms the empty ruins. The silence we encounter is not a void, but a snapshot of a process completed. The cities were not overrun, they were meticulously vacated. This strategic retreat is precisely why these sites were left in such a state of readiness for the sand. With no new inhabitants to occupy the buildings, maintain the walls, or clear the streets, the desert's patient advance met no resistance. The dunes did not conquer a living city, they simply filled a footprint already abandoned by its creators. The very emptiness, therefore, becomes a clue to their final days, a testament to a managed departure rather than a violent end. Their story culminates not in a single moment of collapse, but in the fading echoes of countless footsteps leading away from the center toward new ways of life on the ever-shifting edges of their world. The desert's most famous cities are themselves built upon whispers of the past. In the ochre sands of Mauritania, the ancient trading center of Chinti stands as a living monument. Its stone mosques and labyrinthine lanes declared a treasure of our shared world heritage. Visitors walk its sun-baked streets, marveling at the medieval architecture that made it a revered crossroads of faith and commerce. Yet beneath the familiar stones, a quieter story waits. Local tradition speaks of older foundations, of structures and pathways lying just below the current city, hidden by time and accumulated debris. These are not just rumors, they are clues to a fundamental truth about Saharan civilization. Places like Chinti are not single-era creations, they are palimpsests. Imagine an ancient parchment where an original text was scraped away so the vellum could be reused, but where faint traces of the older writing still linger beneath the new. This is the nature of so many desert settlements. For millennia, the most strategic locations, reliable water sources, defensible positions, natural trade junctions remained magnets for human habitation, even as the climate and cultures above them changed. When a mud brick building from one era collapsed or was abandoned, the next community would often build directly atop its leveled ruins, using the same scarce flat land. Over centuries, this process created a layered cake of history, with the earliest chapters pressed deepest into the earth. The thrilling implication is that beneath the well-documented medieval glory of Chinti, there could lie the compacted floors and post holes of a much older town, perhaps one that thrived during a wetter phase of the Sahara. Systematic, careful excavation in such a place would be like turning the pages of a book backwards. The medieval Islamic trading hub would give way to earlier Berber settlements, which might, in turn, rest upon the foundations of a community from the Garamantian era or even earlier. Finding such a continuous sequence would be a direct physical link, a vertical timeline connecting the age of caravan trade with the age of green savannas. It would prove that human memory of these precious places never truly faded, that people kept returning to the same life-giving spots across thousands of years, each generation adding a new layer to an enduring story. This clue transforms our entire map of Saharan urbanization. The bustling medieval cities we know from history books are not isolated wonders, they are merely the most recent chapters. They are the visible tip of a vast, submerged mountain of human history. Each known site becomes a potential doorway, its surface architecture just the welcome mat to a deeper, richer narrative waiting below. The search for lost metropolises, therefore, is not only a trek across empty dunes, it is also a descent, a journey downward through the very floors of places we thought we already understood. The lifeblood of these cities was not water alone, but commerce on a continental scale. To understand their rise and their staggering wealth, we must follow the caravans that moved three specific commodities across the sea of sand. The first was salt, a mineral so vital it was literally worth its weight in gold. In the heart of the desert, at places like the infamous mines of Taghaza, workers labored in brutal conditions to cut slabs of pure salt from the earth. In the forested kingdoms south of the Sahara, where humidity leached salt from the body and the diet, this mineral was not a seasoning, it was a biological necessity for survival. Transporting these heavy, crystalline blocks northward was the desert's great challenge and its great opportunity. The second commodity flowed in the opposite direction. From secretive mines in regions like Bambuk and Wangara, rivers of gold dust and nuggets traveled north. This gold fueled economies far beyond Africa, filling the treasuries of Mediterranean empires and later, minting the coins of medieval Europe. The control of these two flows, salt heading south and gold heading north, created an economic engine of unimaginable power. Any settlement that could secure a choke point on this circuit, taxing the caravans or providing them with security and water, could amass fortunes. This wealth paid for the grand mosques, the fortified walls, and the scholarly libraries of the great medieval cities. It funded the patronage of art and attracted diplomats and scholars from across the Islamic world. The harsh, remote locations of many Saharan hubs suddenly make perfect sense when viewed as strategic toll booths on this lucrative highway. They were not built where life was easiest, but where economic control was absolute. The third commodity in this tragic triad was human beings. The trans-Saharan slave trade, operating for centuries, involved the movement of individuals captured in conflicts or raids south of the desert, transported under horrific conditions to markets in North Africa and beyond. This traffic in human lives contributed to the wealth of intermediary powers and left a dark legacy intertwined with the glittering trade in salt and gold. Understanding this complete economic picture is crucial. It explains the magnetic pull of specific, barren locations. A cliffside oasis or a narrow pass between dunes became priceless real estate because it commanded a flow of wealth. The ghost of this vast system is still etched into the landscape. The abandoned salt mines, their pits silent and empty, the worn-down paths of caravan routes visible from the air, and the outlines of vast market squares in ruined cities, all are archaeological targets that tell this story of driven, globalizing commerce. This engine did not just build cities, it shaped empires and connected continents, leaving behind a desert scattered with the physical echoes of its immense and complex power. A copper blade found in a West African village tells a story of wind and whispers. The journey of technology across the Sahara was a quiet revolution, moving not in caravans of camels but in the minds of skilled hands. This was not the simple trade of objects, but the profound transfer of knowledge, where the desert acted as a vast, slow-moving university for an entire continent. The most transformative lesson may have been in iron. While the Nile Valley and North African coast had long mastered the art of smelting iron from ore, this complex technology did not stay put. Through the very trade networks that carried salt and gold, the knowledge of ironworking began a gradual migration southward. It did not travel as a written manual, but as a living craft. Imagine a master smith, perhaps from a Garamantian workshop, joining a caravan heading to a trading partner in the Sahel. Through demonstration and shared labor, the intricate steps of building the right furnace, achieving the necessary heat, and working the molten metal would be passed on, adapted to local fuels and ores. This was not a one-time gift, but a process of sustained contact, requiring trust and mutual benefit between urban centers separated by dunes. The evidence for this intellectual migration is etched in stone and clay across the desert. Architectural techniques offer a clear blueprint. The use of vaulted mud brick construction, so effective in the dry climate, appears in variations from early Saharan settlements to later cities along the Niger River bend. The fundamental design for digging deep, reliable wells, a technology of absolute survival, spread from oasis to oasis, each community refining the method for their specific geology. Even pottery tells this tale of shared learning. Distinctive ceramic styles, specific shapes for storage, or specific decorative patterns pressed into the clay before firing appear across vast distances. These are not traded parts, which would be too heavy and fragile for such journeys, but traded ideas. A potter in one settlement learns a new, more efficient form from a visiting trader, then teaches their apprentice, and slowly that design ripples outward, adapting slightly with each new pair of hands. This diffusion required more than casual contact. It required a landscape dotted with stable, welcoming hubs where craftspeople could meet, talk, and learn. The lost cities were those hubs, the permanent classrooms where such deep exchange could take root. This transforms the Sahara from a mere corridor of commerce into an active agent of continental development. It was a harsh but effective testing ground. A well-digging technique that failed in the shifting sands of the Libyan desert was forgotten. A ceramic glaze that cracked in the extreme diurnal temperature swing was abandoned. But the technologies that worked, that allowed communities to store water, build stronger homes, or create better tools, were not just kept, they were perfected under pressure. The desert, in its relentless way, curated human innovation. It filtered out what was fragile and amplified what was resilient. This focus on technological transfer completes the picture of a truly interconnected world. The cities were not just marketplaces where goods changed hands. They were synapses in a continental nervous system, firing with the shared sparks of new ideas. When we look at a centuries-old iron tool from a kingdom south of the desert, we are not just looking at a piece of metal. We are looking at the culmination of a long conversation that started in a furnace hundreds of miles to the north, a conversation that crossed the sea of sand one careful, knowledgeable step at a time. This silent exchange of how to shape the world may be the most enduring legacy of those buried metropolises, a legacy written not in stone but in the very progress of a continent. The Tenere Desert is a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight. Nestled in the heart of Niger, this region is often called the desert within a desert, a title it has earned through absolute, terrifying purity. It is a hyper-arid expanse of endless gravel plains and towering sand seas, an area nearly the size of California where the concept of a permanent water source simply does not exist. For centuries, even the famously resilient Tuareg nomads crossed its southern edges with extreme caution, viewing its deep interior as a realm to be avoided. This is not merely a challenging landscape for archaeology. It is arguably the most logistically hostile environment on the planet for sustained human exploration. The sheer scale of the Tenere forces a humbling confrontation with the limits of our knowledge. While satellite eyes can peer down and detect the ghostly traces of ancient river channels and paleo lake beds beneath its surface, confirming what those shadows represent is a task of monumental difficulty. Sending a ground team into that void requires a military-scale operation, with convoys of vehicles carrying every drop of water and every liter of fuel needed for survival. The cost is staggering, and the window for work is brutally short, constrained by furnace-like heat and blinding sandstorms. As a result, vast swaths of this immense territory remain archaeological terra incognita, a genuine blank spot on the map of human history. This untouched vastness is the 10th and perhaps most daunting clue. It is an admission of our profound ignorance. We have traced the outlines of civilizations along the Sahara's more accessible fringes, in the mountain ranges and the wadi systems, but the deep interior, the Tenere, guards its secrets with absolute ferocity. The very conditions that would have made life there nearly impossible in the later eras are the same conditions that would have perfectly preserved any earlier evidence, should it exist. If a community from the Green Sahara period ever ventured into what was then a lush basin within this region, and if they left anything behind, the total lack of moisture and the minimal wind disturbance in certain zones could have frozen that moment in time. The complete absence of later settlement means there would be no confusing layers, no palimpsest of cultures, just a single, pristine snapshot buried under the sand. This presents a thrilling and frustrating paradox. The inaccessibility that has protected potential sites for millennia now protects them from discovery. It creates a perfect shield. The Tenere, therefore, represents the ultimate frontier. It is a promise whispered by the wind, a suggestion that the greatest discoveries may not lie beneath the dunes we have already named, but in the ones we have not yet dared to cross. This clue shifts the narrative from a story of what we have found to a story of what we have yet to seek. It challenges the next generation of explorers, equipped with ever better technology and tougher logistics, to confront this emptiness. The silent, daunting expanse of the Tenere is not an end to the mystery, but a new beginning, a reminder that the Sahara's lost chapters may be waiting in their most complete form in the places we have been least able to look. A rediscovered city can vanish a second time, not to sand but to human hands. The moment a lost metropolis is pinpointed on a map, a delicate and urgent race begins, a race not just for knowledge but for its very survival. The ethical landscape of this work is as complex as the desert itself. For every dedicated researcher with a brush and a notebook, there are looters with shovels and metal detectors, drawn by the illegal antiquities trade. A single night of digging can destroy the context of an artifact forever, tearing a page from a historical manuscript that can never be read. The craters left behind are wounds in the archaeological record, erasing the story of an object's origin, its use, and its meaning. This illicit scramble turns history into a commodity, severing the connection between an artifact and the community whose ancestors made it. The threat does not end with looting. The very act of revealing these sites carries a profound risk. A mud brick wall, preserved for millennia under a protective blanket of dry sand, begins to erode the moment it is exposed to wind and the rare but destructive desert rain. Excavation is, by its nature, a destructive process. This creates a fundamental dilemma for archaeologists. Do you excavate to learn, knowing you might accelerate the site's physical decay? Or do you leave it buried, preserving it for future generations with better, less invasive technologies? There is no simple answer. Modern practice increasingly favors a middle path, a strategy of minimal intervention. Teams might excavate only a small, key area to answer a specific question, then carefully rebury the site to protect it. They rely heavily on remote sensing, using ground-penetrating radar and drones to map subsurface features without ever breaking ground. The goal shifts from uncovering everything to understanding everything possible while leaving the physical legacy intact. This philosophy extends directly to the living communities who call the desert home today. The Tuareg, Berber, and other groups are not merely bystanders to this history. They are its cultural inheritors, the guardians of oral traditions and deep knowledge of the landscape. Ethical archaeology now recognizes that these communities must be partners, not subjects, in the process. This means involving local people from the start, training and employing them on projects, and ensuring that the economic benefits of research and any subsequent tourism flow back to them. It means listening to their stories and respecting sacred or significant places. When a discovery is made, it is not just an academic triumph, it is an addition to their heritage, a piece of a shared past that can foster pride and provide new opportunities. The rush of visitors drawn to a newly famous site presents another layer of challenge. Unmanaged tourism can trample fragile ruins, deplete local water resources, and overwhelm small communities. The solution lies in careful, community-led planning, creating sustainable models where tourism supports preservation and local livelihoods rather than undermining them. This modern dimension transforms the quest from a purely intellectual adventure into a profound exercise in responsibility. We are not just finding lost cities, we are becoming stewards of their fragile remains. The ethical imperative is clear. To learn from the past, we must also protect it, ensuring that the voices of these ancient metropolises are heard not as a fleeting echo, but as a lasting conversation that honors both their creators and their descendants. This stewardship forces us to see the desert not as a blank slate for exploration, but as a living museum, a library of human resilience where every stone and every shard has a right to tell its full story. The story these clues tell is not of a single lost civilization, but of a rhythm. Saharan urbanization was a recurring phenomenon, a pulse that beat in time with the very climate of the desert itself. Picture the green Sahara as the expansive phase of this great cycle, a time of abundance when human communities could spread out, exploring and settling across a verdant landscape. This was a period of diffusion where populations grew and cultural identities took root under the reliable monsoon rains. But when those rains began to fail, the rhythm shifted. The expansive phase gave way to a powerful contraction. As water retreated, people were not simply vanquished, they were funneled. They were drawn toward the last reliable oases and the dwindling rivers, consolidating into tighter, denser communities out of sheer necessity. This forced concentration was the crucible of innovation. It was in these pressurized hubs that the brilliant water technologies were born, from the Forgaras of the Garamantes to the intricate catchment systems of the mountains. Scarcity did not end their story, it redirected it. With survival secured through engineering, these dense oasis settlements discovered a new source of power, their strategic location. They became the vital nodes on the emerging map of desert trade. The very aridity that pushed them together now pulled the wider world toward them, as caravans seeking to cross the barren stretches had no choice but to stop at these islands of life. Trade brought wealth, ideas, and further social complexity, transforming a fortified village into a bustling town, and a town into a metropolis like Garama. This cycle may have spun more than once. There is compelling evidence to suggest that earlier humid periods, long before the one that ended 5,000 years ago, could have set the same sequence in motion. A community might rise to sophistication during a wet phase, only to see their world dry out and their achievements slowly buried by sand. Millennia later, a new green period could begin, with new people spreading across the forgotten ruins, unaware of the foundations beneath their feet, only to eventually repeat the same brilliant, desperate adaptations when the rains faded once more. Each peak of urban life was not an isolated miracle, but a crest in a long, slow wave of human resilience. The shifting sands played a dual role throughout this epoch. In the dry phases, they created the very conditions that made trade routes necessary and valuable, enabling the rise of the oasis cities. But when aridity passed a critical threshold, when even the deepest wells and most ingenious tunnels could not keep pace, those same sands became the agent of concealment, patiently filling the abandoned streets and covering the monuments. This unified theory reframes the entire Sahara. It is not a graveyard for forgotten kingdoms, but a dynamic stage where human societies learned, adapted, and reinvented themselves across dozens of generations. The lost metropolises we are now uncovering are not anomalies. They are the high watermarks of this enduring rhythm, proof of a deep and persistent dialogue between humanity and one of Earth's most challenging environments. Their disappearance was not an ending, but a pause in a cycle that speaks profoundly to our own era of climatic change. The tools we use to listen to the desert are about to become far more sensitive. The next decade promises a revolution in how we see the unseen, driven by a convergence of technologies that will turn the entire Sahara into a transparent landscape. Imagine satellites equipped with sensors so precise they can detect not just the shadow of a wall, but the faint chemical signature left by ancient human habitation in the soil. Picture autonomous drones, silent and solar-powered, flying pre-programmed grids over thousands of square miles, their ground-penetrating radar painting three-dimensional maps of entire buried city blocks without a single shovel breaking the surface. The sheer volume of data this will generate is beyond human capacity to analyze alone. This is where artificial intelligence will step in, trained to recognize the subtle digital fingerprints of human construction, scanning millions of satellite images to flag promising anomalies for a human expert to review. These are not science fiction dreams, they are the imminent next chapter in archaeological science. Their deployment means we will no longer be searching for a needle in a haystack. We will be methodically scanning the entire haystack with a metal detector. The potential for discovery is staggering, particularly in nations like Libya and Algeria, which hold vast, unexplored territories rich with history. As these regions find greater stability, the door will open for large-scale, systematic surveys that have been impossible for decades. We could be on the verge of mapping not just a few more lost cities, but entire interconnected networks of them, finally grasping the full scale of Saharan civilization. Yet this bright future is shadowed by a pressing paradox. The same force that buried these cities, climate, is now accelerating. Climate change presents a dual threat and opportunity. On one hand, increasing desertification and more extreme weather events can accelerate the erosion of exposed mud brick ruins, washing away millennia of history in a single flash flood. On the other, the relentless movement of mega dunes, driven by stronger winds, could uncover sites that have been sealed for ages, offering a fleeting window for documentation before they are reburied or lost. This adds a profound urgency to the work. Archaeology in the Sahara is becoming a race against both time and the elements. The future of the field, therefore, will be a delicate fusion of the ultra-modern and the timeless. It will require international teams sharing data across borders, combining satellite imagery with the irreplaceable on-the-ground knowledge of local communities and nomadic guides. It will demand sustained funding not just for technological marvels, but for the patient, meticulous work of conservation and community partnership. We are standing at a remarkable threshold. The mystery of the Sahara's lost cities is far from a closed book. It is a volume we are just learning how to read. Every new sensor, every algorithm, and every collaboration brings another page into focus. We are on the cusp of a new golden age of discovery, one that will not only rewrite the history textbooks but will remind a global audience of the incredible, resilient ingenuity of our shared human story, written in the most unexpected of places. The sand has kept its secrets for thousands of years, but it is finally ready to speak. This vast archive of sand and stone holds a final, resonant lesson for us all. Our journey reveals that the Sahara was never a blank space on the map, but a dynamic stage for the grand, repeating drama of human civilization. We have walked with the artists of the green savannas, marveled at the engineers who built cities from thirst, and traced the caravan routes that wove a continent together. These societies did not simply vanish into a void. They engaged in a profound, centuries-long dialogue with their environment, a conversation of brilliant adaptation and ultimately of difficult farewells. The shifting sands played a dual role throughout this epic. First as a cradle that concentrated innovation around precious oases, and later as a patient shroud, preserving the footprints of those who left. This story fundamentally rewrites the narrative of the desert. It challenges the old assumption that complex urban life could only blossom along great rivers or fertile coasts. The metropolises of the Sahara stand as testament to a different kind of genius, one born of scarcity and connection, proving that human ambition can build wonders in the most unexpected places. Yet their silent ruins also speak to a universal vulnerability. These were not cities destroyed by war or invasion, but places gradually surrendered to a changing climate. Their end was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow-motion retreat in the face of a drying world, a strategic departure that left their streets empty for the wind and sand to claim. This makes their rediscovery more than an academic triumph. It is a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between human societies and the natural systems that support them. As our own planet undergoes significant environmental shifts, the buried cities of the Sahara become powerful, silent teachers. They show us the incredible lengths communities will go to in order to adapt and survive, and they also illustrate the sobering thresholds beyond which even the most ingenious systems can falter. Each new discovery, guided by satellites and science, is an act of recovery, pulling a chapter of human resilience back from oblivion. It urges us to look deeper, to question our assumptions about empty spaces and lost history. The story of the Sahara's lost cities is ultimately a story about curiosity itself, about our enduring need to find meaning in the silence and to listen for the echoes of those who came before. Their legacy is not merely in the stones we uncover, but in the perspective they offer, a humbling and inspiring mirror held up to our own journey on an ever-changing Earth. The desert has kept its secrets for millennia, but now, grain by grain, it is finally beginning to speak. If this exploration of lost worlds beneath the dunes captivated you, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into historical mysteries. Your engagement is what fuels this journey of discovery, helping to bring more of these hidden stories to light. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which lost Saharan civilization fascinates you the most? Is it the ingenious water engineers of Garama, the pastoral artists of the Green Sahara, or the legendary traders of medieval empires? What historical mystery would you like us to explore next? Your curiosity guides the path forward. Remember, the greatest discoveries often begin with a single question, a moment of shared wonder that connects us across time. The sands of the Sahara hold countless more secrets, and each of us, through our interest and our questions, becomes part of the ongoing quest to uncover them. We are all listeners to the whispers of the past, adding our own voices to the story. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep looking beyond the surface.